London Telegraph ran a long story yesterday by a young American, I think he's a teenager, in fact, named Jonathan Crone. And it is a absolutely gripping narrative entitled My Night on the Mountain of Hell with Dying Yazidi Refugees. He is talking about the Mount Sinjar, where there are thousands and thousands of Christians and Yazidis and others trying to flee and survive the onslaught of the Islamic State forces. He writes, I was on board an Iraqi helicopter and watched as hundreds of refugees ran toward it to receive one of the few deliveries of aid that make it to the mountain. The helicopter dropped water and food from its open gun bays as they waited below. The general with me who led the mission said it's Death Valley. Up to 70% of them are dead. He writes, Iraqi officials say that much of the U.S. aid that's been dropped has been useless because it was dropped from 15,000 feet without a parachute, and the parcels exploded and were destroyed on impact. Meanwhile, yesterday, a Defense Department briefer, General William Mayville, said that the airstrikes in Iraq are unlikely to have much of an effect on the Islamic State's overall capabilities. He said after 15 airstrikes, they've slowed the group's operational tempo, his words. But he said, quote, the strikes are unlikely to affect their overall capabilities or their operations in other areas of Iraq and Syria. And my next guest says this is all too little too late, and the whole world is witnessing a genocide. Lindsay Vesey is the Director of Advocacy and Development for the group Coptic Solidarity on our 550 KTSA Copenhagen Furniture Newsmaker line. And Lindsay, thank you for coming on with us this morning. And tell us, what is Coptic Solidarity?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Coptic Solidarity is a nonprofit organization, and essentially we're dedicated to leading efforts to achieve equal citizenship and rights for the Coptic Christians of Egypt, as well as for other minorities in the region.
And we see a lot of different groups. It isn't just the Yazidis. It isn't just the Christians. A lot of different groups fleeing in the path of this Islamic State, this ISIS jihadists. You say, as Jonathan Crone's piece describes, that what's being done might be a step in the right direction, but isn't enough.
That's right. I mean, right now, Coptic Solidarity believes that the most important thing we can do is provide aid and protection to the religious minorities who are being killed right before our eyes. And you did an excellent introduction talking about the Yazidis who are stuck on Mount Sindar, who are just literally dying of lack of food and water, surrounded by the ISIS militants. And there's many other Christians also who have fled, who are outside Erbil and other cities in Iraq. So right now, Coptic Solidarity is calling on United Nations as well as the United States to create safe havens for these refugees and to provide aid. And like you mentioned, so much of the aid that's been provided hasn't even been helpful because it's exploded on impact, and that's just terrible.
Before we get into that, I wanted to make a point, and you can probably make it better than I can. I think we are apt to forget that even though we think of these as Muslim countries, and we've heard so much about Islam in these countries, these are also birthplaces of Christianity. These are places where Christian populations have lived for literally several centuries.
Sure. I mean, this area is really the cradle of Christianity. And, many Christians in the United States are evangelicals, and we've kind of lost those ties to the historic Christian church. But we have the Chaldeans here, we have Catholics, we have Orthodox Christians who have lived here for thousands of years. And essentially the idea behind ISIS is that they want to establish a Sunni caliphate. They want to establish this area where everyone has to believe what they do, or they must be killed or leave or live as a subdued citizen, paying the jizya. And so that applies to Christians, the Yazidis, to Baha'i, to any other religious minority in the region. And they're just being pushed out of the country or killed.
We're talking with Lindsay Vesey from Coptic Solidarity on News Talk 550 KTSA. So, as we hear you describe this, and obviously it is a terrible tragedy of historic proportions, what can we do? What can a person listening to you right now do about this?
There's a few things we can do, and I think number one is our members of Congress need to hear from us. They need to know that this is an issue we care about, and that we want the United States to provide humanitarian aid quickly. Now, we're not advocating to be engaged in a long, messy war again, but to provide immediate protection for people such as those on Mount Sindar, such as those who are being butchered. We need to provide protection for them, and we need to provide humanitarian aid. So letting your members of Congress know that's something you care about will go a long ways. And I think also what you're doing here within the media, just letting people know what's happening, because, the mainstream media has not done a great job of keeping us up to speed on what's actually happening and really the atrocities of this genocide. So I think those are the two main things that people can do.
What about the UN? I mean, the UN literally was born out of the idea after World War II, a war that featured a genocide, that this could never happen again, and that the members of the UN were pledged to this never happening again. And where are they? Why, in other words, does it only have to be the U.S.?
That's something that's been just so frustrating because, like you said, never again. And we've had countless genocides since the United Nations were founded, whether it was in Cambodia or in Bosnia or in Sudan, Rwanda, and all of these member states have pledged that they will not let it happen, yet each time a genocide occurs or we see all the warning signs, very few people have the political will to stand up and say no. And so I think that that's something where the U.S. should and could be leading, as well as some other countries. I think the United Kingdom is doing a much better job at it than us right now, but the United Nations should at least be having emergency meetings, and at least we should be referring the ISIS leaders to the criminal court, the International Criminal Court. So those are a few steps that the United Nations could be taking right now.
When we talk about, and the military has talked about corridors of safety for these refugees, where are they going, or where could they be going?
That's a tough question right now. Many of the refugees have gone to the Kurdish region, and, fortunately, President Obama has just started arming the Kurdish fighters, the Peshmerga, which is good because they're the only ones who are protecting Christians and the Yazidis and other minorities who are fleeing. Some of them are actually going out of the country if they're able to get out of the country, and then others are actually outside of main towns. Like I mentioned, Erbil, there's 70,000 Christians displaced outside of that city, and close to 60,000 outside of Dohuk right now. So pretty much they're going anywhere that they can to escape the ISIS terrorists, and that could be living in the streets or taking refuge in churches or with family in other cities.
I mean, I think a lot of times we look at the political situation and it seems complicated and hopeless, but before we delve into that, there are people in a burning building right now. We need to get them out and worry about why it caught fire later on, right?
Exactly. And so I think that's why, Coptic Solidarity is called, immediately, let's help these people. Let's bring them food. Let's bring them water and protection. And these are the things that the United Nations should be leading the way on, right? They're supposed to prevent genocide. And so I think that, again, calling your members of Congress, letting them know you care about this, you want to see action right away to protect these people. And also, something as simple as sharing on Facebook and on social media, that goes a long ways in helping create awareness and gaining momentum for our nation to do something to help these people.
All right, Lindsay Vesey with Coptic Solidarity. Find out more at their website, CopticSolidarity.com. Lindsay, I hope we can call on you again, and I appreciate the time today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We're going to talk about this after we take a quick pause here.